Good evening, everyone. Have you ever felt your heart sink after hearing the words, "Can I give you some feedback?" Be honest. We've all been there. That pit in your stomach, that voice in your head saying, "Here it comes. What did I mess up now?" But what if I told you this negative feedback is not your enemy? In fact, it's one of your greatest allies. Yes, it can sting like a sharp pinch to the ego, but just like a workout that burns, feedback is what strengthens us, sharpens us, and sets us apart. Here's the truth: every person you admire, every leader, creator, or dreamer you look up to has faced negative feedback, and not just survived it, but thrived because of it. And so can you. Today, we're diving into the art of handling negative feedback. Not just tolerating it, but leveraging it to become a better version of yourself. By the end of this talk, you'll have tools that will not only help you process feedback, but also empower you to use it as a catalyst for greatness. Why does this matter? Because the way you handle criticism can determine the trajectory of your personal and professional life. When you master this, nothing, not harsh words, not doubters, not setbacks can stop you. Feedback isn't failure, it's fuel for growth. Too often we perceive feedback, especially the negative kind, as an attack. We feel it as a threat to our competence, our effort, or even our character. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if feedback isn't something to fear, but something to value? Let me ask you this: have you ever achieved something extraordinary without guidance, adjustment, or learning along the way? Imagine driving a car without mirrors or GPS. Feedback acts as those mirrors, showing us what's behind us, and that GPS recalculating our route to keep us moving toward our destination. Without it, we're driving blind. When you redefine feedback as a tool rather than a judgment, it transforms the entire experience. It's not about what you've done wrong, it's about what you can do better. Even the harshest feedback carries seeds of insight. Think of it as a flashlight being shown on areas you might not have noticed in the dark. It illuminates blind spots. Yes, it can feel uncomfortable, like stepping into a bright room after being in the shadows, but it's necessary if you want clarity and progress. The reason so many of us struggle with feedback is because we tie it to our identity. When someone critiques our work, we think they're critiquing us. But here's the key: you are not your work. You are not your last effort. You are a dynamic, evolving being. Feedback isn't a statement of who you are, it's an opportunity to grow into who you can become. Let's think about the most successful people in any field: athletes, entrepreneurs, artists. They don't just tolerate feedback, they seek it out. They actively want to know where they can improve because they understand that feedback is an accelerant for growth. Every piece of advice, every critique, every suggestion becomes another brick in the foundation of their success. Now, this doesn't mean all feedback is easy to hear or even constructive. Some people offer criticism without tact or helpfulness. Others might project their insecurities onto you. But even in these moments, you have a choice. You can dismiss the unhelpful delivery, but still extract the useful message. It's like mining for gold. You have to sift through the dirt, but the treasure is worth it. Think of feedback as a mirror that shows us what we can't see ourselves. And the best part, mirrors don't lie. They reflect the truth, whether we're ready to see it or not. The question is, are you brave enough to look? Are you willing to set aside ego, fear, and defensiveness long enough to embrace the lessons that feedback offers? When you redefine feedback, you reclaim your power. You no longer see it as a weapon aimed at your self-worth, but as a tool to carve out your potential. Feedback is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the next chapter. And the pen is in your hands. Your initial reaction to negative feedback is completely natural, it's human. That sting of criticism, the rush of defensiveness, or even the wave of self-doubt is something we all feel. But here's the thing: while your reaction is natural, it doesn't have to dictate your response. Mastering how you handle the emotions tied to feedback is where real power lies. When we receive feedback, especially criticism, our brains tend to interpret it as a threat. This triggers a fight, flight, or freeze response. You might feel the urge to argue and defend yourself, fight, avoid the person giving the feedback, flight, or sit there paralyzed, unsure of what to say, freeze. These are survival instincts kicking in not because the feedback is life-threatening, but because it challenges our sense of self. The first step toward emotional mastery is recognizing this instinct for what it is, a reaction. It's automatic and it's okay to feel it. The trick is to pause and give yourself a moment before responding. That space between reaction and response is where emotional mastery begins. Take a deep breath. Count to 5. Remind yourself that feedback isn't an attack, it's an opportunity. This momentary pause helps your rational mind regain control and keeps your emotions from running the show. I think of it this way: emotions are like waves. They rise, peak, and eventually recede. If you can ride the wave without letting it pull you under, you'll find clarity on the other side. Acknowledge what you're feeling, whether it's anger, frustration, or disappointment, but don't let it cloud your judgment or drive your response. One powerful technique is reframing. Instead of thinking, they're criticizing me, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Shifting the focus from what feels personal to what's practical can help you detach from the emotional charge. Feedback isn't about who you are, it's about what you've done and how you can improve. This distinction is crucial. Another key to emotional mastery is building resilience over time. The more you expose yourself to feedback, the less overwhelming it becomes. It's like working out a muscle. The first time you lift a weight, it feels heavy and awkward. But with practice, you get stronger, and what once seemed impossible becomes routine. The same goes for handling criticism. Each time you process feedback calmly and constructively, you're training yourself to respond better in the future. Finally, remember that emotional mastery doesn't mean suppressing your feelings or pretending that feedback doesn't affect you. It's about channeling those emotions productively. Use frustration as motivation to prove doubters wrong. Use disappointment to fuel a commitment to growth. Let every emotion serve as energy, propelling you toward your goals rather than holding you back. When you master your emotions, you take back control of how feedback shapes your journey. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond intentionally. And in that shift, you transform feedback from a source of anxiety into a stepping stone for success. Negative feedback often feels like an unwelcome intrusion, a spotlight shining too brightly on what we perceive as our flaws. But if we take a moment to step back, we can see it for what it truly is: an invitation to reflect. Reflection turns feedback from a critique into a tool for personal growth. It allows us to pause, process, and ultimately evolve. When you receive feedback, your immediate instinct might be to react, either to defend yourself, dismiss the criticism, or internalize it as an attack on your worth. But what if, instead of rushing to judgment, you treated feedback as a mirror? A mirror doesn't distort, it simply reflects what's there. It gives you the chance to see what others see, not to shame you, but to help you understand where you stand and where you can go. Reflection begins with a willingness to sit with discomfort. Let's face it, some feedback stings. It may point out mistakes you'd rather forget or expose weaknesses you've tried to ignore. But avoiding these truths doesn't make them disappear. In fact, it robs you of the chance to grow. The first step in reflection is to resist the urge to avoid or deflect and instead lean into what's being said. Ask yourself, what part of this feedback rings true? What can I learn from it? One of the most powerful aspects of reflection is the ability to separate the content of the feedback from the emotions it stirs. Not all feedback is delivered with kindness, and some of it might feel harsh or unfair. But within almost every critique lies a kernel of truth, or a perspective worth considering. The reflective mind focuses on extracting value rather than dwelling on the delivery. It asks, what's useful here? Rather than, why did they say it like that? Reflection also requires honesty. It's easy to dismiss feedback with excuses like, they don't understand my situation, or they're just being overly critical. But honest reflection means being willing to ask hard questions. Could they have a point? Is there something I'm not seeing? What patterns or habits might be contributing to this feedback? This kind of self-awareness isn't always comfortable, but it's the bedrock of meaningful growth. Another gift of reflection is the clarity it brings. When you take the time to think deeply about feedback, you often discover insights that go beyond the surface critique. Maybe someone points out a lack of detail in your work. Reflecting on this might reveal not just a need for more thoroughness, but also an opportunity to streamline your processes or ask for clearer expectations up front. Reflection turns feedback into a jumping-off point for broader improvement. Ultimately, reflection is about taking ownership. It's about shifting from a mindset of why are they criticizing me to how can I use this to become better. It's not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about committing to a journey of continuous learning. When you embrace the gift of reflection, feedback becomes less about what's wrong and more about what's possible. It empowers you to grow with intention, clarity, and purpose. One of the most critical skills in handling negative feedback is the ability to separate fact from feeling. When criticism is delivered, it's easy to get swept up in the emotional storm that follows. You may feel anger, embarrassment, or even shame. These emotional reactions can cloud your judgment, making it harder to see the constructive elements of the feedback. The key to navigating this is to pause, take a step back, and examine the feedback through a more objective lens. The first step in this process is to recognize your feelings and allow yourself to experience them without judgment. You don't have to suppress the rush of emotions that arise when you're criticized. It's natural to feel defensive or upset. However, the crucial next step is not to let those feelings dictate your reaction or overshadow the actual content of the feedback. Emotions are often knee-jerk responses, but they don't necessarily reflect the truth of the situation. By acknowledging your feelings and giving yourself space to process them, you can maintain a clearer perspective on the facts that are being presented. To separate fact from feeling, start by identifying the core elements of the feedback. Focus on the specific points the person is making. Are they pointing out an error, suggesting an improvement, or offering a different perspective? Break down the feedback into its key components and ask yourself, what's the actionable insight here? What parts of this feedback are concrete and which parts are based on the person's subjective opinion? For example, if someone says your report was confusing, you might initially feel defensive or frustrated. But if you separate the feeling from the fact, the core message is likely that your report lacked clarity. This is a specific, actionable piece of feedback. Now, instead of focusing on the emotional response, you can direct your energy toward improving clarity in your future work. Another key element of separating fact from feeling is understanding that criticism often reflects more about the perspective or preferences of the person giving the feedback than it does about your abilities. Not all feedback is objective or entirely accurate, especially if it's based on personal biases or misunderstanding. By acknowledging that feedback is a perspective, not an absolute truth, you gain the power to decide how to interpret it. Even when feedback feels harsh, there is often a kernel of truth that can be used constructively. This doesn't mean that all feedback should be taken at face value. As you separate fact from feeling, you'll also develop a more discerning eye for feedback that's truly helpful versus feedback that may be skewed or misinformed. The more you practice this skill, the better you'll become at filtering out noise and focusing on what's valuable. When you master the art of separating fact from feeling, feedback stops feeling like an attack on your self-worth. Instead, it becomes a neutral tool, a set of observations you can use to make better decisions, refine your approach, and improve your performance. By focusing on the actionable facts of the feedback, you maintain your emotional balance and turn every piece of criticism into an opportunity for growth. One of the most powerful shifts you can make in handling negative feedback is to reframe your critics as catalysts for growth. Instead of viewing criticism as a roadblock or an obstacle, you can learn to see it as a powerful opportunity to innovate, refine, and evolve. Critics, no matter how harsh or difficult to hear, often hold the key to unlocking your full potential. It's easy to dismiss critics as obstacles, people who don't understand your vision, who are overly negative, or who simply don't see things the way you do. But when you change your perspective, you realize that criticism is one of the most honest and direct ways to challenge your assumptions and force you to think outside the box. Every critique, no matter how uncomfortable, can act as a mirror, reflecting areas that need attention and improvement. Critics can reveal blind spots you might not have noticed on your own. In the heat of the moment, we often become so attached to our ideas or the way we do things that we fail to see inefficiencies, flaws, or missed opportunities. When someone points these out, whether through formal feedback or offhand criticism, they are doing you a service. They help you recognize what's not working so you can adjust and improve. In this sense, their criticism becomes a gift. Rather than resisting or resenting the feedback, the key is to embrace it as a tool for self-improvement. This requires a shift in mindset. Instead of thinking they're criticizing me, think they're giving the chance to become better. Even if the feedback is difficult to hear or feels unfair, it still holds value. It provides a perspective that, if applied, can lead to a stronger, more refined version of yourself or your work. One of the ways to turn critics into catalysts is to develop a sense of curiosity about their perspective. Instead of defensively countering their points or brushing off their feedback, ask questions. Seek clarification. For example, if someone says, "I don't think your approach is effective," ask them, "What would you suggest as an alternative?" This turns the criticism into a constructive conversation, allowing you to gain valuable insights that can enhance your performance. In addition to fostering curiosity, it's crucial to practice humility. Acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and that others might see things from a different, perhaps even more insightful angle opens you up to growth. Instead of immediately dismissing a critic's point of view, recognize that they might have valid reasons for their perspective. Even if their delivery is blunt or harsh, the underlying message could contain a valuable lesson for you. Criticism can also be a powerful tool for innovation. Many of the most successful people in history have used criticism as fuel to propel them forward. Thomas Edison, for instance, faced numerous setbacks and criticisms while working to invent the light bulb. But instead of letting the negative feedback discourage him, he used it to refine his approach and ultimately revolutionize the world. Similarly, in today's world, innovators and creators who face criticism often use it as a stepping stone to breakthrough moments, honing their craft and pushing boundaries. In this way, critics are not roadblocks, they are essential contributors to your success. They offer perspectives that force you to question your methods, adjust your thinking, and refine your approach. Every critic is an opportunity to improve, to challenge your assumptions, and to elevate your work. When you learn to embrace feedback as a catalyst for growth, you shift from seeing criticism as a threat to viewing it as a powerful tool for personal and professional development. Instead of feeling defeated by your critics, you empower yourself to use their feedback to create something even better. When faced with negative feedback, the idea of feeling gratitude may seem counterintuitive. After all, criticism can feel harsh and uncomfortable, and our first instinct might be to reject or deflect it. However, the practice of gratitude in response to feedback has the potential to transform your entire approach to growth. Gratitude isn't just about being thankful for the positive things in life, it's also about appreciating the lessons, challenges, and even the discomfort that feedback brings. At its core, gratitude is a mindset shift. Instead of viewing feedback as a personal attack or an inconvenience, you can train yourself to see it as a valuable gift. When you approach feedback with gratitude, you shift your perspective from one of defensiveness to one of openness. Instead of focusing on the negative emotions that often arise, you begin to ask, what can I learn from this, or how can this help me grow? Gratitude for feedback allows you to detach your sense of self-worth from the opinions of others. When you feel defensive or upset in response to criticism, it's often because you've internalized the feedback as a reflection of your value as a person. But if you cultivate gratitude, you begin to see that feedback is about your actions, not your identity. This shift enables you to separate your emotional reactions from the actual feedback and approach it with a clearer, more productive mindset. One of the most powerful ways to practice gratitude in response to feedback is to reframe how you perceive the critic. Instead of seeing them as an adversary or someone trying to put you down, consider them as a valuable teacher. Just as a great coach pushes you to improve, a great critic challenges you to stretch beyond your comfort zone. They provide you with a unique perspective that you might not have otherwise considered. When you can adopt this mindset, it becomes easier to express thanks both to yourself for staying open and to the critic for offering valuable insights. Another aspect of gratitude is the awareness that feedback, especially the negative kind, is often the most honest and direct way to improve. The people who take the time to give you constructive criticism are often those who want to see you succeed. It's easy to surround ourselves with people who offer only praise, but true growth often comes from those who challenge us to see things differently. By appreciating that this feedback is intended to help, you position yourself to make the most of it. Gratitude for feedback also encourages humility. When we are open to receiving criticism, we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and that we have room to grow. It's a humbling experience to accept that our work isn't perfect and that there's always room for improvement. But this humility is a powerful catalyst for personal growth. By accepting the fact that we are on a continuous journey of learning, we open ourselves up to ongoing development and self-improvement. Lastly, practicing gratitude in the face of feedback helps you build resilience. The more you embrace criticism with a positive attitude, the less it stings over time. Gratitude makes you more resilient to rejection and less likely to let negative feedback derail your progress. It shifts your focus from the hurt feelings to the opportunity for growth, and that shift allows you to move forward with renewed energy and purpose. In essence, when you cultivate gratitude in response to feedback, you empower yourself to turn every critique, no matter how difficult, into an opportunity for growth. You become less focused on the discomfort of the moment and more focused on how the feedback is shaping you into a better version of yourself. Gratitude transforms feedback from something to be feared into something to be embraced. With this mindset, you can approach criticism as a key ingredient in your journey to success, turning every setback into a stepping stone toward greater achievement.